Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Bit of a first for the Talent Equation, because I've got a guest who's sort of representing professional basketball, who's coming onto the Talent Equation for the first time. We've explored the concept of basketball from the UK's perspective with Alan Keane, and we had some really good conversations, and I played quite a lot of basketball as a kid, although when you're 17 years old and you're still 5'4", it's pretty difficult to compete. But anyway, Alex Sarama, if I've got that right. Alex, welcome to the Talent Equation.
Thank you very much, Stuart. It's a real honor to be on. I loved Alan's episode. I actually listened to it the other week. You've had some really, really prominent speakers on here. So, looking forward to seeing where this conversation goes.
Likewise. So, Alex, tell us all about yourself, what you're doing. You sound like you've got the best job in the world. Tell me what you do.
Absolutely. No, I'm very, very grateful to be doing what I do. So my job title is Associate Manager of Basketball Operations for the NBA. So I work within Europe, Middle East, and Africa, based in Madrid, where I started in our London office. I've been playing basketball. Obviously, I grew up, you can tell with the accent, I grew up in Guildford, just outside London. I played basketball, tennis, and football growing up. My dad was actually a tennis coach, but loved the game. I realized very young that, I wasn't going to make it as a player, and I really just gravitated towards coaching. So I've been coaching since about 16, but in terms of actually coaching in the sense that we'd call it, not very long at all. I'm still very young. I'm 22 myself, so I'm still learning a lot. I started my own club program in Guildford called Goldhawks Basketball. That was when I was 16, and then I studied history at the University of Nottingham, so I don't have a sports academic background, but I kept the club going when I was at university, and then joined the NBA as an intern when I graduated, and then just worked hard in the NBA, worked my way up into the position I have now. Really what I do is it's a lot of travel over the summer. It's about probably 85% travel. We have a number of NBA players from Europe, obviously, so I go and support them with their camps. And then in the season, when it's the NBA regular season, I'm typically doing junior NBA. So it's a lot of travel, doing a lot of clinics throughout Europe, and it's just a great position. I get to speak to a lot of different coaches, observe a lot of different practices, cultures, training styles. That's basically in a nutshell what I do right now with the NBA.
Is this sort of, I guess, part of? I mean, we've seen a lot of NBA stuff on our screens. More recently, we're getting live games. I think last year there was 3-4 of them. And this is, I suppose, a big part of NBA's expansion into UK, Europe, all that sort of stuff, where you've actually got players running camps, you're getting out there, speaking to kids, getting them excited about all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I suppose quite a lot of, American professional sports happening with NFL as well. There's a big following over here, and I think there's a recognition that there's a big following over here, and we've got a huge appetite for the sports. And having them come over here, and the players coming over here, and then sort of, I guess, having that impact on participation, getting more kids involved in the sport and doing all that kind of stuff. Is that kind of how the plan works?
Yeah, completely, Stuart. So, I mean, my team, Basketball Operations, we're responsible really for growing the game, but then we have other departments in our London office who work on the other elements like events, partnerships, etc. But in terms of the NBA game, we've actually just announced as well, we got Washington and New York coming to London again. We've had the NBA game in London for like 11 years now. So it's really just trying to, increase exposure to basketball and to the NBA. And then the junior NBA program, we actually have a partnership with Basketball England and 17 other federations in Europe. And that involves a league where it's a school-based league where each school becomes an NBA team. So it's really just about providing a really positive first experience of the game. And obviously, as we know, having a more positive experience of the sport is likely to lead to greater retention and the kids enjoying basketball and liking the NBA as they grow up.
Fantastic. I grew up, I think basketball came on our screens when I was, I don't know, about 13, 14, and we all just hooked onto it. Everybody I knew was a Lakers fan, and needless to say, I was just immediately captivated by the Celtics, by Larry Bird, and so we just naturally had rivalries going on all the time, and we would just play. We would play everywhere we could, but particularly at school, we had goals on the tennis courts, and we would just be there like in the morning before school. We would be there in every lunchtime, this, that, and the other. 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, sometimes something like 11-on-11 when it got really crazy. But like it was massive. And then sort of it almost felt like the NBA kind of disappeared from the kind of public consciousness for a best part of a decade, maybe more. So it's amazing it's coming back again. And it definitely feels to me like it's never been more popular as a brand, but also the game itself has never been more popular, certainly in the UK. I don't know if you're feeling that in Europe and UK.
No, completely. I think the NBA is really like we go to new heights every year as a league. In terms of Europe, obviously the number of European players we have each year, it grows. We had 113 international players last year alone, so it's increasingly becoming an international league. And I think especially in UK, I think we're definitely going to grow more in the next few years, and especially with programs like Junior NBA. But I love the point you made about playing, the small-sided games at school. And when I look back on when I was playing as a kid, I think most of my learning actually came through just playing in the playground, like 2-on-2, 3-on-3, etc., without going to the practices that I went to, just being in that environment. And that's why I think basketball is just it can be such a popular sport, because it's so easy to play. You just need a basketball, and we don't have as many constraints as other sports like that. So that's why I think it's definitely in the UK. It can still get to new heights.
Yeah, and I think when I was started out my career, funnily enough, my career in sports development, one of the governing bodies, I'm not sure which one, probably Basketball England, had managed to do a kind of sponsorship deal with a soft drinks company, and they launched the Outdoor Basketball Initiative, which you may remember, where there was basically outdoor goals being put up everywhere. I think it was sponsored partially by at least a couple of different brands, and that was great. But again, I don't think we necessarily capitalized on that. It almost felt to me like the missing link probably was the stardust that you guys can bring to the table, so that gets those. Because I go around now and we've got like outdoor basketball goals all in parks all over the place, and I see people playing with them, but I don't think we get enough out of them in terms of that informal play. I mean, if I could find 3 people who could handle a ball to play 2-on-2 with on a regular basis, that would be my exercise. I don't get enough exercise, but I'd happily do that if I could find anybody who could handle a ball. But it just doesn't seem to work that way. I don't know why. Whereas in Europe, everybody does that. Everywhere you go, there are parks and goals, and people are playing all the time. I just don't quite know, and I don't understand what it is about the British psyche where we don't do that kind of thing, apart from the likes of five-a-side football and what have you.
Completely, that's so true. And being based here in Madrid in Spain, the number of like outdoor playing spaces, it's incredible for basketball. I mean, and just like a small space, even in the city centre, just an abundance of places to play. And I think, obviously, Spanish coaching is, in terms of basketball, it's very well regarded. But I do think that one of the reasons Spanish basketball has been the highest amount of NBA players from Spain is because of that. And, kids play at every school here has hoops outside.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of schools, obviously, through junior NBA. Naturally, in parks, they have hoops, and kids are just playing, organising themselves, etc., and getting better through that.
It's it's funny actually, because I think my story is probably a little bit with basketball, a bit similar to yours, in the sense that we didn't have a club locally, so 3 of us set one up, and we were basically school kids. We were 16. We just decided to set a club up, and then we managed to get a few guys to come and play with us who were actually pretty handy, and then they gave us a little bit more structure, and then we entered a league. and we used to just get destroyed. But it was just brilliant to be playing basketball, proper basketball. And one of the things that I remember so vividly is, again, you talk about adaptability, right? When you're limited like me, right? So firstly, you talk about white men can't jump, right? Well, I am definitely that guy, right? Literally can't get off the floor almost. So, what do? So obviously you get good at outside perimeter shooting, if you can. But my big thing was just assists. I was like Mr. Assists and so what I did was, funnily enough, talking about going back to the sort of philosophy of this podcast, if you like, one of the things I used to do is, I had a half size Boston Celtics basketball, and I deliberately got a half size one because I figured that if I could handle that, just dribbling it to school, dribbling it out to school on both hands, when it came to a bigger basketball, I'd have better feel and better touch. I have a lot of these recollections and think there's lots of things sort of falling into place for me in terms of skill and skill development and play and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting how I think that's where I sort of developed some ability to be able to see a pass and pick and roll and all the tactical elements of the game and all those sorts of things. And it's when people think of our nation as not necessarily being as skillful as others, I do think there's a correlation in our lack of informal play stroke backyard pickup games in comparison to other nations, and there's got to be a correlation with that somewhere. I'd love to find some research to back that up.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And also, I know with looking at other countries in Europe, having the lower hoops and the smaller ball is just the norm. And you see, you see kids. I mean, there was actually a game. I get a lot of people commenting on Twitter. It was released like a week or two ago with Real Madrid versus a French select team under 12s. Right. And the hoops were lower. Obviously, the ball was lower, but the things the kids were doing in terms of skill, because they're allowed to experiment and it was a smaller ball, they could perform, advanced skills, which they wouldn't be able to if it was, a taller hoop or bigger basketball.
Yeah.
And I think that's just common in Europe to have that in like U12 leagues. And I mean, from my experience, when I had the club in England, it was very, very like with facilities and in schools, hardly any schools had hoops that you could adjust. Like young kids, like U11 kids, will be playing on full-size courts. So I definitely think there's correlation between playing the small-sided games outside and then actually when it comes to the structured play, the difference between being on a full size and playing like mini basketball, if you can call it that.
Yeah. I mean, I where I am right now, I'm looking out the front of my house and I can see on our driveway is our goal, freestanding goal, and it's one of those ones that is adjustable, and it's gone up as my son's got older. It's gone up in stages, and we play pickup games out there all the time, and he loves to go out there and do like kind of funky shots and try and shoot from everywhere. What's been really interesting is we've just played, no promise you now, right? We've just played, and his ability to handle the ball with both hands, his ability to shoot from range, he is developing a shot. And I know this is a theme that we're going to come on to, but he's developing a shot without, they're giving him zero technical information, right? And it looks something like a shot, it's like, maybe he's sort of mimicked me a little bit, or something like that. But he sort of just developed that as a way of shooting. It might need a bit of refinement at some point, but it's just been really interesting to see him develop the techniques of basketball just emerging as we've been playing these pickup games.
No, definitely. I love that. And I love the point you made on the shooting, because, I look at so many things I used to do when I started coaching, I think it's natural and think, why did I do that? And I always used to think, having kids shoot the same way, the perfect, form mechanics was the way to go. But then biomechanically, every kid is different, and every kid sort of develops their own technique. And obviously, I think there are we're taking the basketball shot as an example. There are things you want to have, like a high arc and a certain release point. But I think there's a lot of like you said with your kid, developing his own way to do it, and shooting from different places, developing his own technique. No one kid is going to be exactly the same. And I think now, like, I know not to correct that, and I know what I'd say instead is like trigger points, but I wouldn't have, kids shooting all the same way, because it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is, so obviously, he's playing against me, and we obviously have rules that make it fairer for him, not least of which he gets 2 points for every one I get. I'm obviously not allowed to dunk. And generally speaking, I kind of like, we just mess it around a little bit. But I'm not allowed to swat. I'm not allowed to basically swat the ball out of the air once he's shot. But so I can kind of stand there. But he's got to shoot over me. So of course he's got to get used to the idea of shooting with somebody in the way, and he can't always fully see the basket. And he's got choices then. Does he try and go round and try and find another route to basket, or does he shoot? But obviously you have to shoot with quite a high arc. And then I started to read some stuff about Steph Curry. Oh, and funnily enough, Steph Curry has a really high arc, and he has a better completion percentage, apparently, because he has a really high arc. And I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if there's some sort of correlation with that.
Absolutely. And I think I might have read the same article about Steph, but two interesting things I've heard. I mean, from when he was playing, I heard the first thing was that the hoop he had in his garden was extremely hard to rim, so that if it ever hit the rim, it wouldn't go in; it would bounce off.
Right.
So naturally, he had to get a perfect clean swish every time. So obviously that training environment and him shooting into that every day naturally meant he developed that arc. And secondly, I heard that his grandfather's garden, and this came from Brian McCormick, a great basketball mind. I love a lot of Brian's stuff. And he apparently had a very uneven surface, so it made every time he dribbled the basketball, it would go in unpredictable directions.
Mm-hmm.
So two interesting things. But obviously, with Steph's dad playing, I think visualization was also very powerful, and the fact he could obviously see NBA players a lot, watch them in practices, etc. I think naturally absorbed that as well.
Yeah, I mean that. Of course, that developmental environment is a pretty atypical developmental environment, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's just going to be playing little funny pickup games with like NBA stars and stuff.
Exactly.
But it doesn't always work out like that, does it? I mean, there's plenty, superstar sportsmen whose offspring never achieve those kinds of heights. So it doesn't always correlate that that's likely to take place. But I always find it interesting that when you have the backstory of some sporting superstar, there's usually some idiosyncrasy that they have, and you can trace it back, like you say, to either an equipment constraint or a spatial constraint or something along those lines that then sort of defines them a little bit, defines their kind of key move. Again, it's often correlational, so you can't always say, oh, that's exactly why, but it definitely plays a part, doesn't it?
Yeah, I definitely agree. No doubt about that.
So from the perspective of, one of the things I think we were sort of going back and forward on was this whole area of develop. Your question for me, I suppose, was around this idea of, is there a moment in which we begin to step in and refine somebody, let's say for an act like shooting, because there are better or worse ways of performing that action that are more or less efficient, and so what's the approach we might take? Is that a decent summary of your question, or have I completely butchered it? And by all means, tell me if I've got it wrong.
No, definitely. I think that's a great summary, because obviously looking very specifically at basketball, I think obviously I'm a big advocate of the games approach. Love your stuff on the war against drills and anything like that, and the D word as you referenced on our podcast, but I think with shooting, I think maybe it's a little bit different to some other elements of skills in the basketball practice. And I think personally, I am a fan of sometimes doing isolated shooting just for the confidence element and the repetition element. But obviously, I put that into the context, like you said, of having some sort of defender, or so it's linked into the context of the game.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think almost every sport, regardless of how dynamic they are. So basketball's an invasion game, like, to a certain extent, like football, futsal, if you like. It's limited by space. There's an object that you've got to get to a certain point, and the opponents stop you, try and do what they can to stop you from getting to that point. Certain tactical dimensions and everything, but it's broadly speaking a dynamic game. But within any sport, within any dynamic game, there are techniques and I suppose movement patterns that are kind of closed in nature, or semi-closed, in the sense that How do I describe that? Like, for example, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, actually, a good friend of mine, about the idea of, for example, receiving a ball in football or hockey, whatever it is, and like in rugby, catching and passing and these sorts of things. It's sort of like, people, I think, have a tendency to think of those things as being almost closed, as in there is a way to do that secures the ball, well. And if you don't do those things well, then you don't secure the ball. And likewise with shooting, if you don't get the mechanics right, then you can't propel it the distance you need. You can't propel it with the accuracy you need. You can't propel it with the trajectory that you need. All these things. And I think the debate a lot of people have internally is, how do you give people enough goes at that when in the context of a game, they might not get enough goes. So it's almost like there's too many variables there in a game that they don't get enough goes at it. So how do you give them enough goes to be able to get effective and efficient at doing it when the dynamics are in play? And is that kind of where you're coming from with this?
Completely. Absolutely, yeah.
And I think this partly links back to a little bit of a misnomer associated with what is referred to as the games-based approach, or teaching games for understanding. So teaching games for understanding is born from the idea of developing a tactical appreciation of a game, and is largely tactical in nature. It kind of assumes that there is some element of technical ability within it. And a games-based approach is similar. But I think when you talk about a games-based approach or learning through games, then people tend to think of a game, whether it's a macro game or a small-sided game, but they think of a game in that context. Whereas I'm advocating a game to take lots of different forms. So for me, a game is, if we play 1v1, that's a game, yeah? There's an opponent, there's somebody trying to stop me do something. Now, again, even in 1v1, there's so many options available open to me that I might not do the shooting activity. And likewise, the opponent might do things that stop me from shooting effectively. So I never get the chance to be able to kind of, if you like, perfect the movement.
Yeah.
Now, in my mind, and I completely get that. So I always come back to this idea of, right, well, how do we then create repetition without repetition? This is what Bernstein talked about, and it's what Sean Mishka talks about a lot, repetition without repetition.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is, can we give somebody enough goes without making it so artificial that they're actually having goes at something that isn't actually relative to what they're going to do in a game? So, for example, right, when you learn an isolated movement pattern like shooting, I'm standing here looking at you and I'm pointing my arms up in the air, and doesn't make very good radio. But anyway, when you make an isolated movement pattern like shooting, and if you learn that in an isolated movement pattern, you are likely to learn movements that you will never be able to use in a game. So you'll probably get your feet nice and set. You probably have a nice bend of the knees. The likelihood is you're going to take the ball to the shoulder. You're going to have a release point with a flick of the wrist. You're going to have all these lovely, lovely movement patterns, yeah? But that's probably never going to happen just exactly like that in a game, because there's always going to be some other confounding variable to deal with. So you're going to have some giant with his hand in your face, or you're going to be having to be still slightly on the move from left to right because you're still trying to avoid a defender and trying to create extra space. You might be really pressed for time because whilst you've got a free shot for about less than quarter of a second, the defender's going to take that free shot away, so you've got very little time to do so. So you're going to have to make some kind of micro adjustment. So my contention is, how can we give somebody enough goes, but with the element of variability that they might have that bears some resemblance to the game? Now, the problem with that, of course, is if you have too much variability, too many things going on, there's too much information source, they can't cope with it all, and therefore they can't perform the action at all, and the whole thing breaks down. And that's the challenge, and that's the skill. Finding the practice design that works just enough to get them in the stretch. So it might be, for example, that I'd be standing here with you. We're going to do some shooting stuff, right? So we're going to do. It's a bit like horse a bit like that game, but I'm going to give you 10, right? I'll pass it to you, and then I'm closing you down, and you got to shoot, right? And the game is how many can you get out of 10, and then we swap round. How many can you get out of 10? And if you get more than me, we win. It's a game. It's a shooting game. There's lots of reps, but there's somebody trying to stop you. And so that's kind of where I would go. So that's not a drill because it's not isolated. You're not just standing there doing shooting that's kind of aimless and mindless. There's a point to it. There's a bit of competition, so there's a little bit of pressure. But you're not focused on too many things like should I dribble, should I run, should I, whatever it is. You're just going, I'm going to get a goal, I've got to catch a ball, I've got to shoot a ball before somebody comes and stops me from doing it. So that would be my approach, one approach, not all of them, but that would be my approach to how I would have young people shoot or learn to shoot.
No, that makes sense. And I guess a big part of that as well is in terms of the coach using the game's approach is being creative with the conditions they have in the game. And, I guess if you're creative with the conditions you implement, you can still ensure they're getting repetitions without repetitions, like working on shooting within the context of that game, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So it's about another good friend of mine, Danny Newcomb, who's been on the show. He calls it the mixing desk. Okay. So if you think of volume knobs or faders or whatever, you're either fading up or fading down various aspects of variability, and you're playing with it all the time to be able to get the participant to be able to tune in to kind of your frequency, if you like. So they're paying attention to the same thing that you want to pay attention to. Now, so my philosophically, I would say it's not a big deal, by the way, if the technique isn't exactly perfect as we might conceive of it. If it's efficient and effective, then, that's fine. And we do have a tendency as coaches to want to see an improvement in performance straight away. We're going to want to see it in the session because it makes us feel good, makes them feel good, everybody feels good. Yeah, we do have to get used to the idea that actually working in this way requires a degree of struggle and requires a degree of failure and requires a degree of frustration. But that is inherent in the learning process, so we ought to get used to that, I think. And I think for a long time, we as coaches have tended to sort of shortcut that learning process and go, looks like you're having a hard time over there. Let me help you out. And we take away the struggle and give them the solution, and then we see success and everybody thinks, yes, brilliant. Problem is, that's not going to embed itself in somebody's, kind of movement repertoire because they haven't kind of discovered that for themselves. So instead, what we want to do is we want to guide them. So for example, using my game model there might be somebody who is struggling with an efficiency. So what I might do in that context, for example, is, so let's just say for sake of argument that, the release point's wrong and it's too low. Yeah, the trajectory's too low. It's going in really flat. It's hitting the back. It's hitting the backboard. It's too hard. Whatever technical inefficiency. I just draw attention to that. Just ask them, what do you notice about the way the ball is flying? And they go, oh well. I go, just go and play. And afterwards, report back to me what you've noticed. Now they may not have ever thought about it because they're just doing what they're doing. Yeah. And then they report back to you and say, "What?" So I said, "What do you notice?" And they go, "Well, I've noticed that the ball flies. It's quite low." I go, oh, "All right, okay, all right. Well, so what other options are available to us? I could make it go high. Yes, you could make it go high. Great. Let's have a go at that then. And then let's compare notes on that afterwards. How does it feel? Do you feel like you've got a better chance of the ball going in? Going to get low? This and the other." So I'm still using my technical expertise, I suppose, my knowledge as a coach. I'm not just leaving them to struggle forever, even though there might still be value in that. But I'm not leaving them to struggle forever. I'm just saying, something. I'm just interested about something, or what do you notice about what's happening? I was going to draw your attention to something, and then we'll just spend some time comparing notes. And then that's a way of bringing about the technical change you're looking for, and it's a very non-interventional one, and you're not telling anybody anything. You're not just saying let's jointly share our attention somewhere, and then sort of see what we can discover together in that space. Sorry, I've been ranting again.
No, that's a great point. And I mean, looking at basketball, I see so many youth coaches, in a game with something like a free throw, if a player's shooting a flat arc, staying on this example, and they automatically correct it straight away, saying something like bend the knees or something. Yeah. And now I use I use triggers more. Obviously, I use questions too, so that they can get to that conclusion. But saying things like getting them to like imagine they're in like a telephone box or something will automatically, exactly, they'll do it without the instruction and figure it out for themselves. So from the basketball specific, element, I've noticed using triggers like that has been very useful to like working on specific elements of the shot without giving them the technical correction.
Yeah, metaphor is really powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, completely.
I think, and again, it's a similar thing, isn't it? So when you create a metaphor like that, then people immediately then begin to notice different things. And then it's like, oh yeah, that's interesting. That feels differently. So yeah, it's another really good approach, actually. Like a non-directive approach, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but it's an interesting topic too, especially with the off season now over the summer, and there's so much going around on social media with like trainers working with players, and it tends to all be 1v0 type stuff. So and that traditionally that's always what I used to do in my workouts, and I used to do the same with shooting. But obviously, beginning to understand that there's in my opinion, a better way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes one of the challenges is often people think they're constrained by time, which they are. You've got a lot of players and you haven't got too much time to be able to give everybody enough feedback to spend time with them like I've just described. But, okay, that's just a reality. So the assumption, therefore, is right, I've got to tell somebody something, otherwise I haven't got time to be able to get it through to them. So you just go do this. Well, yes and no. I mean, again, the time thing's an issue because, we're always in a rush. And skill and learning take time, particularly in movement. People talk about learning and they equate it with, like learning maths or times tables. The amount of times I've heard people, kind of make a correlation between, well, when you do your times tables, you just repeat them over and over again so you remember them and then you do that. Yeah, but that's a very different thing. Nobody is actively trying to stop you do your times tables. Nobody's coming along and going, apart from the class clown, obviously, but no one's actually actively distracting you from doing that. If you want to go into a quiet corner and sit there and learn your times tables, you can. And what is it you need to do with times tables? Recall a fact. That is it. It's a purely cognitive process. Whereas what we're doing is not just a cognitive process. If it was, if it was literally, if games of basketball were literally done by free throws, maybe we'd be talking in these terms a little bit more. But even then, I still don't think it would work. But anyway, I know they are won and lost often by free throws, but not solely by free throws. But anyway, what I was going to say is that it's not just purely cognitive. There is something going on. There's action taking place that we have to perceive. And if we can't perceive the action, if we can't perceive well enough, often the action that we choose, the decision we make, if you like, is not an optimal action. And often when coaches get really frustrated with players, they're getting frustrated with them because they're choosing actions that they deem to be inappropriate or less than efficient or less effective or whatever it is, because the coach, of course, has got all the information at their disposal. Not only have they got all the knowledge, all the tactical frameworks, but they also can see everything. The players in the moment, they've got loads of things to attend to, and they're going to make a decision based on the available information to them. Well, if they've never been exposed to a scenario where there is a range of different variables coming at them, it's very difficult for them to then be able to make a decision based on available information. And unless you as a coach have said, these are the sorts of things that I think are worth attending to, i.e. creating our tactical framework, if you like, what a surprise that a player makes a decision that isn't aligned to a tactical framework. So it's one of those things that I think, going back to the point about time, it's tempting to tell people stuff because you're limited by time, but it's very, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling thing. You'd almost be better off just going, I'm going to change the rule of the game now, and I want you to tell me after you've played for 5 minutes if there's anything different about playing with this rule of this game. So let's say it's a 1v1 game again. What's different? So let's say I constrain you by saying you're only allowed to shoot with your left hand, for example. Your opponent doesn't know this, but you do. So you've got to try and find ways, and then you come back to me and you just tell me everything you've noticed about shooting with your left hand. Now you're going to get an enormous depth of learning because I've just created that constraint and the focus. Much more than I just make you stand there with a ball and shoot with your left hand with nobody there. I would argue.
No, definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And I guess that's where like having that athlete-centered approach ties in so well to the games approach. And I think, especially in basketball circles, I think it's more rare, especially in the US, to see that. I think a lot of coaches you have in basketball, I think it's good on one element that they're often former players, but then at the same time they're always doing what they used to do, when they were playing. And I think the whole athlete-centered approach, it's not something I see as often as you'd like to see, even in places in Europe that I travel to.
So what was I'm conscious I've ranted at you for ages. What brought you to this space? What kind of gave you the kind of what took you on a more athlete or player-centered approach? What was the discovery you had?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, when I was in England, just before I joined the NBA, I think that was when Mark Bennett was starting to work with Alan for like the first time and Basketball England. So I've never, even though I'm athlete centered, I would say my approach, I haven't learned the PDS way, and it's something I definitely want to explore more. But sort of that's how I'd say how I was introduced to it. So then it's just been through like podcasts like this, reading, that I've developed my knowledge of it. And it's funny because I don't actually see it in practice much at all in Europe. I actually go to Eastern Europe a lot. I was just in Lithuania last week, and obviously a basketball hotbed, a ton of players who come from there, but very, very instructional, very traditional in that regard. So in terms of like how I like got onto athlete-centered stuff, it's really just been through my own personal development, really.
Which is great, actually, because I do quite a lot of mentoring of young coaches, or coaches who are in the early stages of their careers, let's say. They're not necessarily young, they're young in their coaching years, I suppose. And quite often I'm quite surprised at how they'll quite often ask me, for example, they'll say, have you got any books that you can recommend, or have you got any papers that you could send me, or anything like that? And a part of me, it always makes me laugh slightly, and I try not to be too affronted, but anyway, because there's such a wealth of information. I mean, it's out there.
Completely.
Like you say, I mean, Brian McCormick, he does amazing stuff. He was quite a big influence of mine in the earlier stages of my career, just hearing somebody with similar ideas and go, yeah, see, that correlates, because I used to look around different sports quite a bit. And obviously, because I wasn't getting anything out of my sport necessarily at the time, apart from the same old garbage, really. So I was like, what are other sports doing? Where can I find information? And it's that kind of curiosity that I think is a really important feature of a coach, somebody who's constantly on the lookout for, there's something interesting, and all that sort of stuff. And I do think Mark said something recently, which I think is very, very true as well, which is relevant, which is, I think there's actually such an amount of information now that it's almost bewildering. It's quite hard to know what to pay attention to. So I do get that. And I think that's probably a more bigger challenge, I think, for younger coaches coming through, is to be able to work out what they should focus on.
Yeah, but definitely filter it out.
Yeah, exactly. What you can't do is say there isn't any information out there. I mean, back in the day when I was starting out as a coach, you wasn't any, you had to literally dig out. You could maybe get the odd book. You might, internet wasn't what it was at all. I'm showing my age now, but you just didn't have access to information in the same way. So I'm quite jealous usually, and I'm usually a little bit sniffy when people ask me to send them papers. I'm like, it's just out there. Google Scholar.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Completely.
So I'm really glad to hear that you've been out there finding it out and digging around and stuff. Basketball seems to have some great people in it, I have to say.
No doubt. Really, really good people. Especially all the different places in Europe. It's just fascinating, like hearing people's different stories, speaking to different coaches. But one thing which I do find interesting is, like, because I've set myself a challenge this summer. I'm doing something crazy like 10 different camps for NBA players, and I'm using a complete games approach to every camp I'm doing. That's why I emailed you about the shooting question. But it's funny because a good friend of mine, a colleague here in the NBA, it seems like, this approach, games approach, athlete centered, it seems like I'm not crazy, but it's just very, very different to the norm. And it's funny because personally, it shouldn't be that way. But even speaking to different coaches in Europe, their technical and tactical knowledge is incredible. Like, doesn't even compare to the small amount of info I know. But in terms of the approach, that's sort of when I debate with them, they think it's just very different.
No. Well, and I tell you what, you're not on your own. Just based on some of the conversations I have on a fairly regular basis. You mentioned the war on drills. The response that got tells you something about where we are as a profession in terms of embracing some new ideas. And so I would say, yeah, I totally would understand that. I think big parts of the States are probably very similar as well. Whilst I say there's some good people out there, but people like Brian and other people like that, they're still in the minority, I would argue.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree. Yeah.
Most basketball coaches, I would say, look, I'm massive generalization, but basketball, it seems to me, methodologically has stayed quite the same for quite a long time. It's pretty wedded to tried and tested approaches around certainly tactics and also, technical development drills and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I was in Trieste recently in Italy, a really good youth club. They were doing some new things, which I love. But then I saw a 3-man weave drill, which personally, it's probably the drill I dislike the most. And I was saying to the coach, a friend of mine, we had the argument very comfortably, where I was like, why on earth are you doing this? And he said, because Ettore Messina did this. And Messina is a legend coach. Like I said, unbelievable knowledge of the game. But I think that especially in basketball, there's always been a particular coach does it, always been done this way, therefore that's why we do it. And there isn't actually any thinking into what they're getting out of the activity they're doing.
Do you know, it's funny, I was talking to somebody about that yesterday, about how there is this tendency to copy.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's fundamentally one of our biggest challenges as an industry is, and it's quite interesting how if you do ask somebody that question, why are you doing that? The answer that you give is usually very, very illustrative of a range of different things about that individual. If they have to pause, why? Why would you ask me that? It's important. So I working across sports and working in different sports, often you don't have a technical framework. So quite often a question I'll just ask somebody is, I saw that there. Why did you do that? And it's amazing the response you get. Actually, I'm never ceases to surprise me.
That's amazing.
Often people have never thought about it. A friend of mine, actually, he's a coach developer, and he was working with rowing. And he asked one of the coaches, he said, why do the rowers, the big lads, why do they warm up with flip-flops on? And the coach went, are they wearing flip-flops? Just hadn't thought about it, And these are things, it's become cultural norms that each sport has that no one thinks to question. They're the emperor's new clothes.
Yeah, completely.
When you've got no knowledge, you can ask those stupid questions. When you've got some knowledge, you don't want to ask those questions for fear of looking stupid. And the key thing for me is we've got to keep asking those questions. In terms of kind of moving coaching forward within the industry, is that a part of your remit?
Yeah, sort of. So we do some junior NBA clinics in the different countries we go to. So I'm just going to Budapest tomorrow, so I'm going to do a clinic there for youth coaches. And part of what I advocate is I'm trying to, I'll be talking about like a games approach, and I'm actually going to deliver spend about 10 minutes in the clinic just talking about classic basketball drills, and then I'm just going to be talking about better alternatives. Because even in places I go to in Europe, great places, I still see like there's still a staple like group of drills which you see, like a zigzag drill, 3-man weave, like passing lines, and I'm just going to spend some time talking about that, and then showing with a games approach some different scenarios. So yeah, it's a fun part of the job for sure, and just being able to speak to different coaches, and like a lot of what I've learned so much since I started the NBA, and most of it just comes from conversations, speaking to coaches at dinners. And it's definitely, I think I had an idea of certain things when I started, but I couldn't argue them very well. So it's been like very useful in terms of like making my philosophy stronger and having better like reasoning as you said, why I'm doing things a certain way.
Yeah, and I think the key thing for me, sort of just flicking on for a second, my kind of day job hat, I suppose, around engagement, and encouraging participation, increasing participation, and retaining people in sport and physical activity. I'm very passionate about creating a great experience. And I mean, I'm reading a great book recommended to me by another podcast guest, Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And that's all about experiences, all about great experiences. And, what makes an experience great, what makes a moment great, why are they defining, what is it we remember about them, and all those sorts of things. And interestingly, he's talking about how they've been talking about sport actually, and how sport has a defining moment, which is the game. But I don't think actually, and so if the game is the defining moment, and that's the thing that's the most exciting piece, and then the rest of the sports experience, i.e. the training, isn't like that, then people are thinking, oh, we'll do the training because we've got to get to the game. Well, I just think, no. Let's have, within every training session, let's have peak moments on a regular basis that are kind of game-like as much as we possibly can. And if by the skillful manipulation of those game forms, we can not only create something that's so engaging that people are like, I can't wait to come to that again. That not only can we do that, but also we can really help them develop their abilities and skills as performers. I mean, it's just, again, I've said this so many times on this podcast. It's why would you not want to do that? Now, the biggest problem, I think, is it's hard. Yeah, of course it is. But it doesn't mean it's not worth it. So again, that's another big driver for doing it this way, really.
Yeah, and I remember just my PE lessons at school. It wasn't that too far long ago for me, but I remember the typical structure. It would all be whatever sport we were doing from like aged 11 to 16. It would all be drills, then a game, and every especially when you're younger, the first thing kids ask is like, oh, is there a game at the end? And I think that happened. That was just the norm for PE. I mean, I don't know what things are like now, but that was my experience of physical education classes. And I know when I was running the Goldhawks Club in England, the key thing was increasing retention of girls' sport and stopping the drop-off rate. Yeah. And things like satellite clubs and having like this informal environment. But in my opinion, just a key part of that would have just been using more games-based activities just to make whatever practice session more enjoyable for the kids.
Absolutely. And interestingly, isn't it? Look, you get lots of ancillary benefits. You get less poor behavior. Why? Because they're engaged. Yeah. And what you said about your PE lesson, that's quite a lot, I would say, quite a lot of kids' coaching sessions. Is there a game at the end? We've got to do this to earn the right to the game. Kids come to me, are we going to play a game? Sure we are, right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I say I start all my junior NBA clinics. It's all games, and it's funny because I was in Lithuania in a very traditional gym, a great club, and it was great fun straight away. And I almost got the impression that that wasn't the norm, and that the kids weren't used to having a smile on their face the whole session while still learning at the same time.
Really?
Yeah.
So you rocked up, did this session, and they were a bit like, wow, this is different, this is new, wow, we like this. And there's like, why can't it be like this all the time?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's a great feeling as well, isn't it? I mean, just selfishly, it's a great feeling when, kids go, that was great. I really like that. And I'm going, yeah. And but what do you learn from that? And it's like, yeah, well, I've learned loads of this and that. Oh, okay, that's good. And
Yeah, no
I've
doubt.
I've said this a lot. People. I hear we've had a big thing on the media at the moment about Fortnite, the video game, and
Oh yeah.
and now how it's the scourge of our children's health and well-being, and there's a 9-year-old girl who was so addicted to Fortnite that she didn't go to the toilet and wet herself. And why is she playing Fortnite at 2 o'clock in the morning in her bedroom? It's nothing to do with the game. It's to do with the people around her who are allowing that to happen. Anyway, what is it about that game? It's compelling. Yes. Why is it compelling?
Yeah.
What is it about it compelling? You know what? They're with their friends and they're coming up with plans and they're coming up with games and they're coming up with strategies and they're trying to do things together and they're interacting. And I can hear my little boy play. He plays it and he's having a great time. They're working it out and they're getting together. It's really social. They're really trying to, they don't want to let each other down. They're coming up with these plans. They're trying to get better at it. And they're playing all these sorts of games. And I really get that. And I really like something about that. But what is it? It's about that they're totally free. Nobody's telling them what to do. And they don't get that opportunity anymore. They don't get to play the kind of free-flowing pickup games that I used to play until it was, dark and my knees were bleeding and all that sort of stuff. They just don't get that level of freedom anymore. My view is that if we can make our coaching sessions something like as compelling as that, with some of that freedom linked in within it, then at the very least, sport and physical activity can compete with these video spaces. And if we think as coaches that getting kids in cues and lines and repeating movement patterns over and over again based on some spurious idea that that's important from a skill acquisition perspective, we're doomed, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I speak to my dad quite a bit just about coaching. He was a really successful tennis coach, and when I look back at his sessions, I never really understood. Obviously, I didn't understand the methodology of it when I was playing. But upon now, when I remember it was all games the whole time. And he made a good point as well in terms of retention. Growing up in Guildford, kids would be doing like 6 different sports every weekend, and just to get kids, to enjoy your sport. And I think, especially for basketball, when we're even smaller, and we've got so many sports that can compete with in England, to have games-based stuff. Kids will enjoy that way more, I think, than going to other like a traditional sports training sessions doing drills.
Absolutely. Like, you don't really see it, do you? When they get together to play their own games, they don't all just stand there and go, right, I'm going to give myself loads of goes at this by myself. Just get in it, don't they? And just start playing and making up game rules and stuff. It's got to equate to what who has it said it? I think Jonathan Henderson. You need to make the session look like what kids would do if the adults weren't there to spoil the fun.
Yeah, like the playground, playground scenario.
Yeah, but if you're subtle about it and you can manipulate the game form a little bit, here's an idea. Why don't we do that? Then A, it can become more engaging for them, and B, they start to learn different things. And that's the mission, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's very when you get it right, it's very rewarding because you can see it, and it's like it really plays back to you as a coach. And I think it's another reason I'm so committed to the approach, because I get so much from it. So there's an element of selfishness from it, but I can't go back to what I was doing before, because who was I talking to? I was talking to someone yesterday, actually. It's like, it's a bit soul destroying, it's like, it's a bit, really? I think that's why a lot of us do it like this, because we're like, there's got to be more to it than this,
Yeah. No, definitely. And like, it's especially when I remember when I first started, doing more games-based stuff, like activities, especially with the pressure of the junior NBA, and in terms of the NBA brand, in terms of, I think there's a stereotype that things had to be neat and tidy. Yeah. And that's something that I challenged. And it can still be organized, like organized chaos, because it's still organized and everything, but it's just random activities, like basketballs could go flying everywhere, kids could be falling over, but it's how they learn. And I, with every junior NBA clinic I do, I want to I look at it as if the fact that the brand we have, it should be like a really, really positive. I try and make it like the most positive experience of basketball the kids have had to date. So that's why it's perfect to me doing all this games-based stuff, because it's the whole time kids are having fun, moving, learning.
And brilliant. I mean, it's fantastic that, you know, as a representative of the brand, that's what you would want to do. I mean, and I wish more people had that kind of a viewpoint, because, like you say, if we sort of, I mean, you're kind of taking what I talk about quite a lot, you know, which is that it's almost like a customer approach. You know, if you treat people like they're customers, you know, you think you want them to come back and this, that, and the other. And okay, they're not buying anything necessarily, apart from they're buying a product, I suppose. But you're buying their fandom and their loyalty, I guess, aren't you? If you want to look at it in commercial terms. But in reality, it's about a great experience. The product we have is an experience, and we've got to make that experience amazing. Otherwise, they just find something else, whether it's another sport or it's something far less productive or whatever it might be that they're going to derive, you know, they're going to get from some excitement from. So good on you.
Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate that.
All right. Well, people, I imagine, will be interested in reaching out and finding out a bit more about what you do, and maybe get their school involved with what you're doing with the, you know, when the league comes to town or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Is
there a way of them getting in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for any schools interested or any like PE teachers listening to this in England or Europe, best contacts are actually the federations. So with Basketball England, if they go on the website, there's actually most federations, they have a junior NBA section, and there's like loads of information on how the school can sign up to it. So I definitely recommend doing that. And I think from a junior NBA perspective, we've got a lot planned over the next few years, which is going to be really, really exciting. And then, you know, any coaches that want to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter, starting to use it a lot more. It's Alex J. Sarama. And I'll leave my email address too. I'd love to just, you know, talk coaching with any coaches that have, you know, listened to this and you want to get in touch.
Great stuff. I'll put that onto the I'll put a link there so that people can get access to you, or if they want to come through to me, I'll put them in touch with you. I'm more than happy to do that. The other thing I was just going to ask as well, so can kids basically, if they want, can they join the junior NBA through their federation? Is there like a way of an individual joining, or is it just kind of stay in touch with what the junior NBA is doing, and then there's events and things, and then you can sign up and all those sorts of things?
Sure. So at the moment, it's all schools based.
Got it.
But the really good news is in England, we actually, just in partnership with Basketball England, we expanded the leagues significantly earlier this year. So we started with we have 5 leagues now, but it's going to go up to 16 in a few years, which is going to be so many schools. So it is school based, but we have resources too. We have a junior NBA app with challenges and things for kids to work on, etc.
Awesome. This is good. I mean, as you know, I work in the sports sector, and I didn't know anything about this, which is bad, and I should have found out more about it. But I'm glad that we've been able to tell some people about it, because I think it's a fantastic initiative, and the fact that it's growing is brilliant. I mean, I know my employer, Sports England, we obviously fund Basketball England, which is great, and it sounds to me like clearly the partnership they have with you is going to be part of that. So indirectly, hopefully, I'm making some kind of a contribution. But brilliant, I love it.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Stuart. Real pleasure to be on the podcast.
And thanks for coming on. It's been brilliant to talk with you about coaching and the approach that you guys are taking. I love the fact that you're trying to grow the game across Europe. Like you say, as you probably know, it's a game I'm very passionate about. Wish I could play more often, but what you're doing is amazing. So all power to you, and all the best for the future.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
Boom. There you have it. Great conversation. Really excited to get Alex on, actually. I mean, what a job he's got, eh? all across Europe, gallivanting around, working with NBA players, expanding the reach and the connection that the NBA's got with children, young people, fans across Europe. Amazing. Must be a really enjoyable and rewarding experience. Like anything, I guess it's probably got its pros and cons, ups and downs. But I love what they're trying to do there in terms of getting kids hooked onto basketball. Game that I really enjoyed as a young person. Like I said, I'd love to play more. And definitely the sort of game that I see my kids getting involved in. Loads of good things coming out of that. And how cool that he's prepared to come on board and ask me some questions to say, look, how can I help other coaches within what we do within our camps to provide a better and more engaging experience. And I hope I was able to give him some insights, some thoughts, some ideas that he can share with the people that he's working with. Anyway, hope you got something really valuable out of that. Again, I was on a bit of a rant, but one of those things where I just get really enjoy talking about the ways in which we can create these engaging experiences for young people, and I think that's a big part of why we do what we do. So in the meantime, if you want to support the podcast, as always, head over to the website and click on the Patreon button at the top of the page. Really appreciate that. Lots of people coming on board, and it is making quite a big difference in terms of being able to cover off some of the costs associated with production, editing, and all those sorts of bits and pieces, which is helping me to be able to find more guests to bring on. So as always, really appreciative of that. If you want to reach out to me, got any thoughts or questions or things that you might want me to cover on a podcast, or even if you're out there and you're doing some interesting things and you want to share what you're doing with me, let me know, and we might be able to set something up and see if we can't have a conversation. There's so many. I'm always amazed at how many amazing practitioners are out there doing amazing things, and kind of out there and prepared to share their knowledge and learning with other people. So that's it. It's an important part of what this podcast exists to do. So by all means, reach out to me on the website. You can get in touch with me there, and we can have a chat. In the meantime, as always, ditch those drills, and I'll see you next week.